So we're going to start off with a land acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging with honor and respect the indigenous nations on whose traditional territories the university now stands and whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. We also acknowledge the elders past and present, including MSU's current Council of the Elders, and humbly ask for their guidance. The Valley of the Flowers has been and remains a place of learning for Native American peoples, who for millennia have passed ways of knowing, being, and doing from one generation to the next. While land acknowledgement is not enough, it is important social justice and decolonial practice that promotes indigenous visibility and a reminder that we are on settled indigenous land. Then, to introduce VSU, the Black Student Union's primary purpose is to advocate for the Black community, promote leadership, and embrace and educate about Black cultures and issues. The BSU also strives to provide a welcoming and supportive space for Black students at Montana State University and beyond. Anaya, Lyla, and Jess are current leaders and members of BSU at MSU and strive to fulfill its goals, as well as work to improve the overall experience of Black students on campus. I will now hand it off to BSU, who will give them a warm welcome.
Hi everybody, thank you guys so much for coming. This is a presentation for the impact of the university system on Black students, so I hope you're in the right space. We're just going to do some real quick intros. My name is Jessica Brito, I go by Jess. I'm currently a junior here at MSU. I'm also an honors student like some of you might be, and I'm studying psychology and history here, and I'm the current vice president of the Black Student Union.
Hello, my name is Anaya. I am a junior studying organizational biology on pre-med track, and I'm the current president of the Black Student Union.
Hi, my name is Lyla Brown. I am currently a senior. I'm studying sociology, criminology, with 2 minors, one in psychology, the other in women and intersexuality studies. And 2.5 years ago, I started the Black Student Union, served as the president, and now these two are the leadership. Cool. So we're going to talk a lot about academic elitism tonight, and we just wanted to talk about why should we be even talking about the topic of academic elitism. So to avoid silos of knowledge, so to allow for education to be dispersed and to allow it to not be remain in solely rigid academic settings, and then so that to know how we interact with elitism every day by attending university, and also to help us understand why college is seen as elite and how to interact unproblematically with those who are not in this academic college setting.
Okay, so before I get actually into the topic, I kind of want to go over a bit of a timeline because that's very, very central to the topic. So, first things first, America's first university, which is Harvard, was founded in 1636. And the next timeline point is Massachusetts created the first compulsory education law, stating that children within the ages of 6 and 14 were required to go to elementary school in 1852. So essentially, higher education exists in the U.S. for 200 years before normal people who are not socially accepted, basically meaning people who are not rich, people who don't own land, and people who are not men, have stable access to even elementary schools in order to learn how to read and write. So that is the very definition of elitism and exclusivity. Okay, so a continued timeline. Juneteenth, for those of you who don't know, this is the date that finally all enslaved people received the news of their freedom. Back then there wasn't the internet, you couldn't email people and be like, you're not a slave anymore. So they had to ride horses all the way to Texas to let people know that they were finally free. And this is about 2 years after slavery was actually abolished, and 12 years after the first compulsory education law, meaning that slaves did not have access to that education that was now compulsory or required. So the last date is the desegregation of schools with Brown versus Board of Education, which was passed in 1954. We all know that HBCUs have been founded before 1954, but the educations were not the same in HBCUs as they were in all white colleges. So this led to a sense of elitism that marked certain schools as like Ivy League and other schools as normal colleges. Ivy League is also, by the way, a term that was founded in 1954, so that kind of leads to a connection. It should be noted that all schools that are considered Ivy League are also private, which should also lead to another connection. So, what is academic elitism? So, it is the idea that academia or academians are prone to elitism, or that certain experts or proposed ideas based on more support with academic colleagues than on their rural experiences. So, this has the term Ivy power, which is a metaphorical phrase or metaphorical place, or an atmosphere where people are happily cut off from the rest of the world in favor of their own pursuits, are basically synonyms to mean the same thing. They both imply the university system's prone to a sense of elitism. This concept stems directly from the university system being made for the elite society, like I mentioned before. If you were not white, if you were not a male, if you did not own land, you could not go to college or elementary school at one point. So, this does not even get into the direct race-based disparities. Like I mentioned, due to slavery, slaves were not allowed to have an education in any form. Basically, something to think about is that our education system, well, in our education system, Harvard is considered like prestigious, which means if you get a degree from Harvard, you're going to get a better job. If you go to Harvard, you're all of a sudden like, wow, you went to Harvard, amazing. So, same thing happens with honors colleges and academically free life. So through your exclusive elitist-based involvement, you now have a better opportunity than the rest of the population, and there lies a privilege in that. So specifically to honors colleges, similar organizations, many honors programs began after World War II when a search of highly qualified students seeking higher education exceeded the capacities of highly selective private universities. So in order to combat that, honors colleges were created. The current model ones are basically based off of one that was founded in 1960 at the University of Oregon. So, and the very first one in the country was founded in 1922 at Swarthmore College. So rather than just thinking about the history, these also go back to that timeline that I was talking about. So when these honors colleges were created, Black people did not have access to this education. So we didn't have access to basic education, and now there's like honors colleges, which are like higher, more prestigious educations that we also didn't have access to. And it furthers the education gap that we're still dealing with and trying to remove today. So MSU specific, MSU is no stranger to elitism and elitist groups. These groups may not always realize the effects that they have on minorities, especially Black students, who were for so long denied proper means of education, like I was mentioning to you all before. The Honors College at MSU was founded in 1964, and it was not an honors college, it was just an honors program. But this was during the time that all of you were probably sure that civil rights protesting was taking place. And even if this program was inclusive in the sense that it allowed Black students to actually go there, it did not address the disparities that were already there. So implementation of the program unknowingly and hopefully unintentionally made the education that I was talking about wider. So this fact makes MSU's honors college unintentionally elitist towards minority groups, but especially the Black and Indigenous people. And like I said, this is not even taking into account that historic redlining for certain areas for high minority populations were considered as bad and undesirable. And it's happened around the country, and Montana was not stranger to that at all. So these are all factors that contribute to the low enrollment of minorities in MSU's honors college today. And all of the same reasons apply to having the place free life on campus and their reasons for being unintentionally elitist.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about PWIs and HBCUs. A PWI, by definition, is a predominantly white institution, and the term is used to describe institutions of higher learning in which white students account for 50% or greater of the student enrollment. Again, kind of to highlight what Anaya was saying, Harvard is a PWI, being based in being the first college when there wasn't very high access to education, as well as today, other numbers still are far above 50% leaning towards white students. And then MSU, where we are right now, was definitely not founded as a predominantly white institution, but it still is. I'm definitely going to get more into the statistics later. And then HBCU, from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, by definition is a college or university in the U.S. established before 1964 for African American students, or historically Black college or university. The term HBCU was created in 1965 by the Higher Education Act that expanded federal funding for institutions of higher learning. The first HBCU was Chenault University in Pennsylvania, although the most well-known one is probably Howard University in Washington, D.C. And I read a lot of articles that people suggest that it's the most popular because at first it focused mainly on theological studies. And then, although HBCUs were founded to support Black students during segregation and after segregation, they are no longer there to solely serve Black students. In 2015, Howard University had a 22% non-Black student population. So then, this is a hefty slide. I'm gonna let you all digest this, but U.S. colleges have been segregated for many years now, and this time did not necessarily, for me personally, include my grandparents being able to attend college or really even have access to great high school. So this leap in education really is something that's very personal to me. So I just wanted to note that. So in 1968, 30% of white people were able to get a college degree, and 1% of Black people did. And then in 2018, 56.3% of white students, 56.3% of college students are white students, and only 13.8% of Black students. There's still quite a bit of growth there from 1968 to 2018, but there's still quite a bit of growth to go, which is what this slide highlights. So I wanted to also highlight some of the legacies that predominantly white institutions have and historically Black universities and colleges have. These are all broken into 4 categories: so alumni status, scholarship and excellence awards, cultural events, and sense of community. So I'm going to run through the PWIs first, and then run the HBCU column. PWIs is a greater alumni foundation network that helps create strong ties to the community abroad, as well as to the workforce in general. They have a higher percentage of white students with parents who have alumni status due to the history of exclusion of students of color, and that doesn't just include Black students. Also, a big part of scholarships and excellence awards, there are not very many scholarships that are based out of need. This is only solely based out of need and leave room for holistic evaluation. Most scholarships, when you apply to MSU, you have to have a certain GPA, you have to have certain merit-based traits coming in from high school, which can be problematic when you may come from a low socioeconomic status, you don't have access to transportation or a great school system, and the list can go on and on. There's also a lacking of cultural events, generally at PWIs. I wanted to bring this back to MSU, so I thought about our biggest events like MSU Debut. All of these really didn't happen this year, but Homecoming, MSU Debut, Gold Rush, Dance Marathon, none of those center cultures or celebrate any kind of cultural activity. And then sense of community, many times at PWI, students of color feel that they have to create their own sense of community, which is kind of what I did with BSU, which I guess was, looking back, extremely hard to juggle having to work. I was an RA at the time, I was a sophomore, I had family obligations, personal obligations, and trying to start a club and recruit students is a lot. So having to come into a system where that was already created and that community is already there would have been much more impactful and beneficial for me as a first year or a second year student. And then running down for the legacy of HBCUs. Many African American families were not allowed into college or have access to college until the mid to late 60s, which would make it harder for some low-income students to have alumni status in the future. It also makes it harder if you don't see someone else in your community going to college, specifically in HBCU, it makes it harder to get those resources to understand how to enter that setting. I know that was an issue for me personally. And then some scholarship and excellence awards, they are generally socioeconomically based as well as holistically evaluated. So So, for example, if you have terrible grades in high school, but you have a very strong rate and prove that you would be a great candidate and a great college student, a lot of these awards and scholarships are given at historically black colleges and universities based on that. I'm personally a recipient of a scholarship from the NAACP, and I had fine grades. They weren't super stellar coming in from high school, but was able to write a story and say why, and tell them I will be a better, I have overcome these things, I will be a better college student, and they trusted me, and here I am today as a senior. And definitely without that trust and that leap of faith based on scholarship boards, I definitely would not have entered a college situation. And then cultural events, a lot of the cultural events specifically at HBCUs are culturally centered and sensitive, and bringing an understanding of the black community and the culture that's there. So a lot of the events surrounding homecoming and even the sororities, there's this thing called the Divine Nine, which are 9 historically black sororities and fraternities. We do not have any here at MSU, but again, those initiation practices are non-discriminatory today. They have step teams, the sports teams, dance teams, singing opportunities. All of those bring in and tie in strong cultural ties to the black community. And then finally, to end this slide, sense of community at HBCUs. Many students come from predominantly white communities and they can feel ostracized by those communities for being visually different, having a different culture, having to have different environments at home, whatever that may be. Or whether it comes to hair or food, just a multitude of things there. And going to an HBCU can, at times, not for everybody, but can validate some of those concerns and those identities that were not felt in predominantly white communities that they were growing up in. And then what does this mean for MSU? This is just an empty slide. A lot of my slides are statistics, everything stats, I think are very meaningful. But in 2012, there were 16,093 students total enrolled at MSU, and that is of that number, 83% were white and 1.12 were black. In 2019, there were 19,076 students enrolled at MSU just last year, and that was 15,531 students being white and 229 students being black. I also, again, find value in percent changes, so that is a 1.73% increase for white students and a 0.08% increase for black students. I tried to find some of these specific numbers for the honors college, but the data only showed interdisciplinary degree, so there was only 8. But I know there's more than 8 honors students, so I did not unfortunately add that in.
Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the black student experience and how it can be kind of unique in this situation, from both my perspective, but also just more general processes. Like with any college student, there's a lot of positive reasons to enter into university that I'm sure a lot of you will have a connection with, but some of the positive things are getting that education and that academic achievement, especially for groups that don't have anyone in the family who have done that before, or find that to be a really valuable aspect of growth. Oftentimes, success is kind of correlated with things like education, things like academic achievement. So entering into university not only gets you academic achievement and acquires a degree, and potentially that can lead you to have a better socioeconomic future, but it also allows you to just gain more knowledge and general understandings, especially for many black students. They want to have that knowledge about themselves, their own history, and their own general understandings. So there's a lot of potential for new ideas and new learning. It's also a new environment, new experiences. College is a place to explore and a place for personal growth and to learn about yourself and your identity. And a lot of that can be done both within the college by
getting involved and learning things, but also outside of it, like using study abroad programs and stuff like that. And then communal and social development is also a really big positive. It's like being in an existing new space, existing around other like more educated individuals, being in like a different social environment and like making those new relationships. All things that I think like majority of college students kind of interact with in different ways. But the Black student experience also does have specific negatives to it that can be like pretty particular. One of them being a lack of academic opportunities. So basically, like a lot of Black students come here and they might be not just here, but in all universities, come to a setting and are looking to learn, and in many cases learn about their own experience, people that are like them, people in their history, but they might experience, especially at PWIs, a lack of academic opportunities. For instance, here at MSU, we have 2 classes on Africa as an entire continent, one of which was one that the BSU started themselves this semester. It was the first time it's like being released, and that's like Intro to Africana Studies. So that's 2 courses, and there's no course on like Black history, African American history, Latinx, Afro history, nothing from anything in the African diaspora. So that can be really daunting to not really have that information in an official course, much less like the expectation that would be in other more minor courses. And that can be especially daunting when you see like there's American history and there's European history and there's Asian history and there's Latinx history, which is very exciting to like see, but to be kind of left out of some of these avenues can be a really negative experience. And also there's like resources can be another aspect, just in general, having like a lack of faculty and staff that are also like dealing with your same experiences can be pretty difficult. Another example here at MSU, we have one tenure track faculty member that is Black, who's also African. So that's like a very specific one single human. And then we have like a few like miscellaneous faculty and staff, but definitely not like a representative number of the Black population. And I'm not going to go into like this academic aspect. I'm sure you all use staff and faculty for a variety of different reasons, but even more specific things, and this kind of comes into culture shock, like issues like Black hair is very specific. We tend to have like really curly and kinky hair that is like very different to handle, very different to use. We need different resources. So being able to like reach out to people that are like you, people that are authority figures, and have their help in establishing your space at your university, in your new town, figuring out like where to get your hair done. That's something very simple to do, but for like Black students is like kind of important. It can be difficult when you don't really have those resources. So going into that, also culture shock is a big one, especially when entering into predominantly white institutions, especially for those who did not come from such a space. It can be really daunting. And even those that have come from predominantly white areas have normally already like established their niche of like diverse people or people like them, or established like the resources in place, or made like other white friends that they feel comfortable with, things like that. So college, like for everyone, is very like frightening to enter into, but especially for people like low-income people coming to this environment, people from maybe the South coming here, people from more diverse areas coming here can be very frightening, or just like new, even if it's not like inherently negative, and that comes in with the lack of or like scattered diversity. And then finally, racial abuse and discrimination is of course something that a lot of Black students have experienced, unfortunately. And that just in general can be like really distressing and lead to a lot of fear, or a lot of worry or discomfort, and also isolation, especially if you don't have a lot of resources or people to reach out to, or like a designated space for comfort or things like that. So yeah, and you might not be thinking like some of these things really have an impact on the like success of students or their futures, but Lyla's going to talk more in depth about retention and kind of enrollment rates. But just a good example that I like to use, there was a study done that kind of examined the experience of students at a predominantly white institution that had a comprehensive Pan-African Studies course. So basically courses covering the African diaspora and the like history and culture. So that's just like having academic opportunities related to your experience. And they evaluated like the students who took that, both Black students and non-Black students who took that, and compared it with students who were across many different universities, including other PWIs. and basically found that like for Black students, they felt more welcome in their environment, they were more knowledgeable about their own history, they had a stronger sense of self and identity, had greater academic success, and this had like a direct correlation and like with being more successful, feeling more competitive within and outside of the university, and basically higher retention. And also that it had very positive impact on non-Black students as well, because like here at MSU we value diversity, and it's not just because we value like equality and having more people around, but also because having diverse perspectives, having new experiences, learning new things is like a very important part of college, and does have really positive impacts on people's like overall identity and like sense of self and just general understandings regardless of your heritage. So yeah, here are some things to think about, and I will get back to Lyla.
Cool. So I'm going to again talk about more statistics. I'm very sorry. I really do find them very meaningful. But some national demographics in retention and graduation. So the information that I'm going to give for this first part is from a 2010 study. So in 2010, 60% of all people that had enrolled 4 years previously had graduated. So that's 41%. This is for a 6 year. So for a 6 year study, those from that 6 year cohort, the 60% of them graduated. And for that 4 year cohort, there was 41%, 5 year cohort, 15%, and then 6 year, 4%. So then white students graduated at a total of 64% for the 6 year cohort. For 4 years, it was 45%, 5 years, 15, 6 years, it was 5%. And then Black students had a total 6 year graduation rate of 40%. The 4 year graduation rate was 21%, 5 years 14%, and the 6 year was 5%. I think like this just highlights a lot of the issues. There could be a multitude of issues that we've all experienced being on campus, like feeling isolated, struggling in courses potentially, and again, kind of going back to what Jess said, maybe for some Black students, people of color, feeling that there's no resources available for them on campus, or having a lack of community. And then the next study that I found was for 2017. It was called First to Second Year Persistence. So basically, you enrolled in 2017 and you continued on to school in 2018. The overall percentage was 73.8% continued into their second year of college. For white students, that was 78.1%, and for Black students, that was 66.2%. Some of these have been theorized to be the result of lack of sense of place, lacking mental health services, and lacking of communities on campus. And then at MSU, this is all based on 2011 data that I found on the MSU website. It's very readily available. If you want to look at it, it's a lot of fun to look at if you're interested. So Black student retention and demographic information. In 2011, there was 24 Black students that were newly enrolled incoming freshmen at MSU, and the graduation rate for those 24 students was 12.5%, which is against the narrative that MSU gives us, that we should all like take 15 credits, learn all about that orientation, and graduate in 4 years, and that 12.5% graduation rate is directly contradictory of what they're trying to support. And then also it's important to note that this 2011 data was the only year that was expansive enough for me to like pull all of this. So I imagine that there's been like subtle increases every year. That's been the trend like that I was seeing. It started at like 2002, I think, and then stopped completely, not completely, but there wasn't very many updates past 2011. But I assume that we can generalize that those would be still steadily increasing. And then also on these graphs, the average ACT scoring for Black students was 22.6, and the average SAT score was 974. For white students in 2011, there was 2,403 incoming white freshman students, and the graduation rate for this 4-year degree was 24.6%, which is also contradictory to what we're hearing from MSU, which is a totally different presentation, but I think we should all take that into consideration. And these numbers will generally increase or reach capacity at the 5- and 6-year degree receiving. The average ACT score for white students was 24.4, and the average SAT score was 1137. Some of these score differences that I thought, that's pretty stark in my mind, like 974 to 1137, and those are just like the averages. I thought that was pretty interesting. So some of these issues can result from low socioeconomic status, transportation issues, lack of community centers, lower amounts of college graduates to get information from about continuing their education into higher education realms, little or no college prep classes, and a lack of AP or IB classes at the high schools or dual credit classes. And additionally, one of the biggest things in my mind kind of goes back to low socioeconomic status is having a lacking of funds to pay for AP or IB classes to feel more prepared to enter into college. And I think it's important to know that a lot of this for me comes back to education, public education that we're getting. There's a big trend of higher socioeconomic families pulling their children out of schools and moving to another higher socioeconomic area. That's maybe unintentionally, maybe intentionally, I hope unintentionally, pulling funding from these lower socioeconomic schools and harming lower income, specifically BIPOC children, and it just kind of perpetuates the circle of inequality in college settings.
So I'm just going to kind of talk more about what success for Black students look like. Like we've kind of already talked, it's been about 60 years or so since some segregation and other really aggressive issues with education have started to change. But that's really that's less than my mom. That's my mom's that old, so that's not a long time. And there's still a lot of impacts that come from those changes and working to make those changes. So I just wanted to for a second make us think about the American dream and what do you imagine when you think about that. For me personally, I usually think about you're living in suburbia, you have a house, you have there's a husband and there's a wife, and they have 2.5 kids, and you got a white picket fence and a dog or something, and sprinklers, and it's cute. Which is that's kind of an ideal, I feel basic idea of success. But it is also very white. It's pretty male-centered because often it's the man comes to work and the woman's home rearing the kids and that whole thing. It's also pretty heteronormative. That's another conversation. But there is just these there's high expectations for success and what things university prepare you for, and that can look very different for I think probably a lot of people in this room, and certainly a lot of people across America, and also for Black students. And success looks very different on very different levels, financial, social, career, all those different aspects. And it's not for some people success. They don't find success through college. They do it through working up the ladder or doing laborious jobs, doing more artistic jobs, acting jobs, travel, exploration. There's lots of different avenues for success. I just want to make us think about that foundation. And even within university, the college does prepare us all for success in different ways. Not only in the trying it out in a different major, but some of us are going to go to other higher education and graduate school. Some of us are going to go straight into careers. Some of us aren't going to use our degrees at all. So just important to think about that. And as far as Black students go, many Black students come from and plan to continue existing in Black communities. And regardless of what the Black community looks like, they plan to continue existing around people that look like them, people that are having their similar experiences. Just a lot of white students likely come from and plan to continue being in white communities because that's where their family is, that's where their friends are. That's somewhat natural. But that does mean college is kind of preparing a lot of people for that ideal American dream of getting a good job, getting a stable life, living in a suburban area, and that's usually a white, suburban, middle or upper class environment, and it's not really preparing students for a different kind of American dream that doesn't really align with that a lot of Black students experience and live, or have family members and friends who experience and live. And in that this looks for instance,
Black people, we often speak something called African American Vernacular English, or AAVE, which is basically like a specific type of English dialect that African Americans predominantly use. And that's very different from a lot of the language that is used at a university level. Just like the language between like what you read in like a dystopian like young adult novel is different from your like research paper. You know, there's different like levels to language, but that doesn't mean like where you might come to university aligning with some of the language that's used already. A lot of Black students come into university and they not only have to learn everything that you're learning, but they also have to learn how to code switch, which basically means changing how you like act and the way you talk and the things you talk about depending on the environment you're in. You all probably also do this. I'm sure you talk differently amongst your friends than you do your parents, than you do to like your boss, or like someone you're trying to get a research grant from. But it is like sort of different because there's code switching is something that you might speak just like on a very general level among everybody, and to have to switch to not only on those like more professional levels, but even on those peer levels, to switch to speaking that way can be a little difficult. But that does mean like, you know, we're not really taught how to speak AAVE here. We're not really taught how to interact with some like Black issues. We're not taught about we don't always like we're not always taught like larger Black issues, like, you know, African or Black history, even though we have like white American history options, European history options. We don't have like African history, Black history options. And we don't talk about you know, race and racism always, not necessarily like international relations, sorry, or like the Black Lives Matter movement, or simple issues like Black hair or Black art, all these different things that affect the lives of Black students very daily, even when they're not like more contradictory, dramatic instances like racism, aren't always like taught or like prepared to experience. And so just the Black people, and also Black students just have like a different experience. And then I also wanted to highlight that even after graduation, so after like leaving the university system, there's still a different experience between Black students and white students and other students of color. And so this is mostly a comparison between Black students and white students, and it's all from stuff 2015 and up. Black graduates, like I said, they're more likely to live in diverse or like Black communities, because that's usually where they have family and whatnot. You can get more critically about what that is. But they also tend to live in neighborhoods with other people of lower income, regardless of their own income. So a white student graduating with a higher income is more likely to live with people of a similar income, whereas a Black student graduating with a higher income is more likely to live with people of a lower income, and that also does lead to more like minority communities, more low-income communities. So it's just a different environment that people are going into. And Black graduates are also more likely to be unemployed regardless of their higher education status and degrees. Like they're twice as likely as white people with a bachelor's degree. The black people with a bachelor's degree are twice as likely as white people with a bachelor's degree to be unemployed. So a difference in like the results of your degrees, and they're more likely to experience discrimination and like given fewer opportunities. Specifically in Chicago, they were looking at like their discrimination in the open housing market, and Black graduates were more likely to have like deal with racial steering and racial profiling. They're more likely to be denied a mortgage regardless of their creditworthiness, more likely to be offered a loan that comes with higher interest rates and many additional fees. So basically, even after like being prepared for university, being prepared in the same way, there's like a clear distinction in the results of that preparedness. And Black women, I just wanted to highlight them as well, because women across like any group are more likely to earn degrees, and Black women are more likely to enroll in university than any other group, and they earn more degrees than Black men. So they're like more likely to be in this university system and like graduate from it. But they still, like all these disparities, they're more likely to be paid less than their counterparts just in general. But in particular, Black women are paid just 62% of what non-Hispanic white men were paid in 2018. And on average, Black women earn roughly 40% less than white men every single year. And that's another issue of like the gap between women and men as far as being paid. But another aspect of them being Black women just means they're paid significantly less. They're also more likely to work in lower paying occupations regardless of their like higher education status. So regardless of like how many degrees or what degrees, they're more likely to work in the service industry or in healthcare or in education, which also ties in that like, you know, foundational parts of community and the kind of focus of many of these Black women is different. And they also, sorry, to clarify, as far as the being paid less, I don't mean just in general, I mean specifically in like the same occupation as non-Hispanic white men, Black women are paid less. I don't just mean like in general. Anyways, they're also more likely to deal with like a hostile work environment, with discrimination. They're dealing with like racism as well as sexism, which is a whole mess. And then more likely to deal with like disparities related to their health care and their quality of life and stuff like that. So I just wanted to kind of outline a lot of this stuff. I didn't try to include super heavy statistics, but just give you like a general understanding that success looks different for Black students. Their expectations and their wants regarding success look different, but also their results, even in those that are pursuing the same kinds of like the same American dream that they're kind of prepared for. They're not always going to find that American dream, even if they get that same degree, get that same major, and should have that same like opportunity. They're still going to deal with a variety of different issues regarding finances, regarding finding housing, you know, regarding like relationships, all those things. So there's some stuff like staff evidence them. So the university doesn't necessarily prepare them as well as it does white students, considering these like inequalities that are present. So their opportunities and outcomes from the university look very different. And all of that sounds like pretty negative, but I wanted to talk a little bit about like kind of solutions. And I also want to make a note that like this was a very like Black-centered slide because we are Black students. We're talking from our experience and our research, and we're not going to speak for other groups. But a lot of these issues also do impact other BIPOC or like Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. So they do extend beyond just us, but we're like speaking from our experience in particular. So one of the like biggest potential for a solution is to work on like the systemic and institutional change. So like there's kind of a foundational history, like we discussed, of discrimination and of a lack of diversity, that even if like the current culture has changed, it can still lead to systemic and institutional inequalities that influence like specific laws, specific rules, guidelines, and often the like climate of the university, because they're like part of the foundation of like the house, you know. It's very difficult to like go down and like fix all of that stuff. But it's very important to focus on it because even, like I said, again, if like our mindsets have changed now, those laws and those rules and the impacts of those laws and rules have not necessarily changed. So making sure to kind of review the systemic systems, the systems that are in place, and not just review, but like effectively change them, evaluate them, and make sure they are like actively avenues to like fix the things in place, include BIPOC in these instances, and like improve their experiences. And especially evaluating like historically exclusive and elitist avenues like Ivy League institutions, honors college, academic-based Greek life, all of that stuff. That stuff just has like a more explicit history of exclusion, and so it's really important to highlight those groups and like focus on them in making sure there's change. Also providing them education and resources, both on like the issues we're talking about today for just like general people at the university. It's important to learn about these issues. It's important to know these histories so you can really evaluate the things you're doing in the future. Many of you are probably going to graduate. You're probably going to be in positions of leadership, and it's important to like know what these issues look like and just like have the resources to get that information if you seek it out, like this. And then, but it's also important to just provide like basic education and resources to like all groups on campus, just so they have, like I said before, you know, having like Africana Studies program really does impact the experience of Black students on campus. Just like I'm sure having, being able to like learn about American history and issues like that has really impacted your experience. It's impacted mine as well, but like expanding that and having the like opportunity for more education and more resources is going to improve the lives of all students here. So, and then the third one is just listening and learning from BIPOC voices. Like I said before, if you don't know what BIPOC means, it's like Black, Indigenous, people of color, to highlight the specific history we have with Black and Indigenous people.
But yeah, learning from BIPOC voices, gaining those new perspectives, and really including them in these processes, because for a long time they haven't been included. These have been decisions mostly made by men, mostly made by rich people, mostly made by white people for a long, long time. So in reevaluating these systemic inequalities and trying to make that change, you have to make sure to include the people who this is directly impacting, who have a really big voice and a big piece in this, and make sure it's a more the table trying to cause diversity is also diverse itself. Cool. So that is just a nice little rundown. We're done with our presentation. 6:52, so I think you did a good job. And do you guys have any questions for us?
I'll get it started. So we were sent like the email with some of the diversity plans and like what has recently happened as far as like including the African Studies class that you talked about. So I was just wondering if you could speak to any progress and also roadblocks that MSU has encountered this year.
Yeah, I think like the class, the process of that was basically us getting together and like going through the course curriculum and being like, where are the classes that I want to take about relating to the African or Africana experience? They're not there. There's none. And then it was basically like us emailing professors to be like, hey, where are these classes? And they were like, there's none. So it's a very complicated process, but we basically spent like a lot of time engaging with a lot of different administrators, a lot of different faculty and department heads to basically be like, why isn't this here? You have all these other programs. We're the only like marginalized group that doesn't have a single class, much less an entire program. Even like there's women in gender studies, there's LGBTQ class, which again, amazing, we're like very happy that exists, but we're also like, why is there this odd disparity if we value diversity as much as we do? But it was definitely very difficult because we ended up having like, we met with a lot of these people and they were like, oh yeah, we've been talking about this for the last 10 years, but we just like didn't get around to it. And I was like, that's crazy because it's like an entire continent, but whatever. And yeah, anyways, so we just like brought this stuff to their attention and just kind of like had to work over and over again to like really make them focus. But eventually we got together like a committee and they started working on it. And now the class is created. We're all taking it. It's really good. I would recommend. Yeah, it just took like a lot of work and a lot of energy. It definitely was not something that students should do or we expected to do. And we're hoping it leads some like foundation for the university to start doing that stuff on their own.
Yeah, and I can also talk about, speak on like starting BSU a few years ago. Again, I kind of mentioned it when I was chatting a little bit earlier. It's a frustrating process, but people were like, the same thing you just said, they're like, yeah, like super stellar, stoked that you're gonna do it, like go do it over there, kind of a deal. I think that people like love to say like, we're so supportive of you having a class and having BSU as a space and trying to make more classes and trying to make events and do all these things, but there's like the major roadblock that I've seen personally is like there's not a ton of like action going along with those like that supportive words necessarily. I mean it's great. BSU has become like kind of a big club on campus and like people seem to know about it. Here we are talking to you all. And like there's been some really great like personal relationships being built. On like an institutional level, it's been hard to like get actions instead of like verbal words of support.
Yeah, and part of that process has been like ideally there would be like people on campus that are being kind of paid to do this work, and we do have like a diversity and inclusion officer and things like that. But diversity is a very large blanket term that covers probably all of the people in this room. That's a lot of people. There's like a lot of things that go into that, and they don't necessarily focus on BIPOC issues, much less like Black issues. So like having people in place that like are there for these specific avenues to help like us specifically as students is like very hard to do, but something we hope happens so that like students like us aren't don't have to, much less be expected to like do something like create a class. Any other questions?
Are you all staging any protests or like kind of list of protests happening locally?
We were part of like organizing the Black Lives Matter protest that happened this summer, and we had like a Breonna Taylor vigil earlier a few weeks ago, which was really good. And I think it just kind of depends on the way things go. But I know, I mean, like, we try to keep our base informed. We have a newsletter. Our email is bsu@msu@gmail.com about like events we organize and things we're putting on. We don't like doing protests, and we don't like, oh, we have to do protests moving forward. But they do seem to be pretty impactful, considering some of the things that like result from them. So we're not sure because like protests are there to enact change. And we're right now actively working to enact such change. Some of you might have seen the email about like the action plan at all, but there's some things in the works with that, so we're not sure how that's going to turn out. But if it's effective, then like protests are really needed. If it's not, then you'll hear from us.
I think also we're hesitant, just in general, like in the valley, like our COVID numbers are rising, so there's like a big concern, like safety, especially like BIPOC communities are disproportionately affected by COVID-19, so we're trying to stay away from that for now, especially considering the summer there's like 3,000 to 5,000 people at the rallies in Bozeman, so it's just a lot of people. But, yeah.
Oh yeah, I was just wondering, I haven't had to take many history classes. Do the American history classes like cover African American history very much?
So when looking at the curriculum, because we were reading syllabuses and stuff, and we were looking to create the Africana studies classes, I think one of the classes maybe very briefly touched on slavery, and then immediately moved away from it. So it was kind of like, oh yeah, and there were slaves. Let's go to like, you know, creating the colony or something else. So they don't go very into detail. Also, it should be noted that like Black people were more than slavery. There's like Black civilizations in Africa for thousands of years before slavery was ever a thing. So just for American history to only evaluate like when slaves were first brought here, it's kind of almost counterproductive to what we've gone on.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure the trend you have all experienced is many of those classes, even the ones that like touch on, we have a few classes that touch on race overall, but there are many of them, so it's not like a Black specific class that we wouldn't want it to be. But a lot of the times those are like mostly like the text you're reading, the people you're learning from are mostly men, they're mostly straight, they're mostly white, and that's just like the trend it is. And so like part of this is like working diversity in, but also like diverse topics, and that includes Black people in there, and like Black women, all those things. Yeah, I haven't taken every single American history class, but I've definitely taken some and not been like super stoked. And I think that's just like how it is sometimes. And yeah, like our big goal with creating the class is that it's like an Africana studies class, because there's like such an aggressively large like Black diaspora in Africa is where like all of humanity originated. So there's kind of a ton of history there, not to mention how big it is and how many like different countries there are. But so we wanted to focus on that specifically because it feels like such an aggressive gap. Because there's students today that are getting world history degrees and global studies degrees, and they're not learning about all of Africa, which is crazy. So that's been our main focus with that. And then the Black experience and the African American experience is also very valuable. But like we definitely have had to basically prioritize the larger scheme to like make sure that that knowledge is there first.
Is the BIPOC student group separate from the Black Student Union, or is there a partnership there? Or
The BIPOC, from the emails?
No, I was reading my question. If I'm part of this great BIPOC group, I'm wondering, is it Black Student Union, or is there separate?
Do you mean like Bozeman United? Or
It sounded like a campus thing, so.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I would say that it's separate then.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just, it sounded like a social group.
I'm not sure.
So what are some of your like next steps in terms of like goals for this program and for the university, and then as you know the rest of us as students, like how can we get involved in helping and supporting that?
There's so many ways. That's not a good answer. So there should be in the upcoming days or weeks, hopefully next week, be coming out with another email about this BIPOC student action plan that incorporates basically everything we were just talking about getting more staff, about creating more classes, creating more spaces, strengthening our reporting measures on campus if there's instances of bias or discrimination. Those should be coming to you. If not, we will aggressively reach out to all of you to get that to the honors population. We are looking for feedback. We will be looking at feedback for that, and I think although it's aimed towards BIPOC students, in theory, it will. The way I think about things is it's a Jenga. You pull the bottom piece, the middle bottom piece out, or whatever, and it all just tumbles down. Every student on campus will be able to benefit from having more resources in the diversity office, having strengthened reporting measures and procedures on campus, etc., etc. Classes, every student will benefit from these things. It's not just BIPOC, not just Black students. So I think that's probably the urgent ask that we have, is that when you see that email, please don't just read it and delete it. Open it, read the document, give your feedback. It really only takes 15 to 20 minutes to do, and I know everyone's homework takes much longer, so if you just need a break, if you're eating a dining hall, just do it. We'd really appreciate that. And also, centering BIPOC voices, I guess a lot of my experience at MSU has been weird instances of in my classroom settings of people saying some weird edgy things about Black people. So if you see that, and you see if there's not even a person of color in your class, or you see a person of color in your class, you should speak up. That's one of the biggest things that I've experienced on campus, and also heard from other students of color on this campus. People say weird things in their classes and no one speaks up. So I think those are the two main things for me, at least.
And also we have meetings every single Wednesday from 6 to 7 in Harrison Hall 115. That's right across from Rendezvous, which is Johnstone, and the post office or whatever that place is. That's where we have meetings. Everyone's welcome to attend those meetings. They're halfway social, halfway informative. So we have some days that are more game days, where we're just kind of hanging out and having fun and building social relationships, and all socially distant, of course. And then there's other days where we put on various presentations that usually relate to issues of the Black experience, like this presentation, like Black hair, like Black Lives Matter, or the history of prisons, lots of different things. And those are all things that if you have topics you want to learn about or hear about, we ask for feedback from people. And if you can't attend, you can also, if you want to shoot us an email or talk to any of us specifically, we can put you into the newsletter. We just send out usually one message a week, maybe two, telling you what's happening for the week, and usually giving an update on the events we're putting on, the stuff we're working towards, or just good things to keep an eye out for. So if you're ever I want to go to more events like this, we usually have the knowledge of what those events are and put those out on our newsletter. It's not an aggressively long thing or anything, it's a paragraph. Anyways, so yeah, that's a good way to get involved with us specifically. If you're interested in more general things that we're talking about, there's lots of resources online for you to get educated, get more involved. There's plenty of Black folks online and on YouTube who their whole life is just education or knowledge or whatever. So Google is free.
There's also an African Student Association that meets in the same room that we meet in, and at the same time, just on Tuesdays, when you guys are more interested in learning more about African history. The presentation is very unique, just like ours do, and it does also half social, half informative, but that is also a resource. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you guys so much for coming. Feel free to reach out to us anytime, and I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.